Hi, I'm Frenchie, your friendly neighbourhood music critic, and I'm going to take you through my top 20 albums of the year. 2018 has been a splendid year for new music. You can also catch my writings at Zero Tolerance and Astral Noise magazine. Let's get ready to ramble. So, to kick things off at number 20, this Earl Sweatshirt album, it's only just come out. I only heard it like a couple of weeks ago. I thought I'd finalised my top 20, and then this baby comes along and ruins everything in a good way. So I just had to squeeze it in because I enjoyed this so much. This album's only 24 minutes long, so it's a breeze to listen to. As soon as I'd finished it, I just went back and listened to it like 3 times, and I've been hooked. One thing I love about Earl Sweatshirt is he really understands minimalism. A lot of these tracks, they're in like the 1 to 2 minute zone. They're not very long. That's why the album's so short. And many of them just hang on one repeated refrain. Just a simple 3-second loop can carry an entire song. It's like the tracks are more like sketches. They can abruptly start and finish just like that. There's not really a full start and finish or ebb and flow. It's just like start the track, one loop, and cut to the next one. But it kind of works. The album has this jagged, awkward flow. In terms of Earl's vocal sound, he's a bit, I guess you could say he's a bit monotonous. He's not as versatile as, say, Kendrick Lamar, but that really works with the minimalism of this album as well. I'd say his voice is somewhere in between like the flow of MF Doom and the monotonous style of Guru from Gang Starr. For some rap songs, it's a very brittle, sparse, skeletal album. What I think stands out about this album is that it's very low key, very melancholic. Quite a sad, bit of a downer album. There are some positive spells. Azuka and the Bends have much more of a booming soul samples, something like that could have come off Jay Dilla's Donuts. It's got that uplifting, soulful vibe. I think Earl Sweatshirt's just really mastered his craft with this album. This is the third album from Nothing, an American band. I would describe them as like a heavy shoegaze band, kind of inspired by like the classic shoegaze bands, My Bloody Valentine, Slow Dive, Ride, but blended with elements of post-rock, little bits of Mogwai, but also like kind of like grunge and alternative rock. So it's coming from a lot of different influences, but they come together so consistently on this album. The guitars are just beautifully melancholic, really overdriven and powerful. So many strong melodies, but overall kind of a sad feel. There's a few like upbeat songs, like Us We Are inspires like the power pop of Weezer. And You Wind Me Up sounds like a long lost Britpop jam from like the mid-90s, but I think Nothing really hit best when they're kind of in that sad, drony, melancholic haze. So, I'm going to come out and say it, but I've never been a huge fan of Daughters. I remember listening to them back in college. I really enjoyed their first EP, which is like 5 minutes long. It's just ripping like mathcore screamo. When it came to their self-titled album, which was released like 8 years ago or something, like I kind of just lost interest. That one didn't do a lot for me. So fair play to Daughters. Not only have they changed their sound very dramatically from when they started, but they've come out of an 8-year hiatus and released one of the most critically revered albums of the year. But with this album, Daughters have very much gone for an industrial sound, pounding drums, clanging guitars, nightmarish synthesizers. The lead vocals are just really anxious, almost recalling like a cross between Talking Heads' David Byrne and Swan's Michael Gira. One thing I really admired about You Won't Get What You Want is the flow and the structure of the album. So with every track that goes on, it just gets more menacing, more intense, more suffocating. It's a real like journey and an experience. It makes you want to listen to the whole thing in one sitting, like, which is the best way to experience an album. So it's very much an album fan's album, so that's great. So yeah, by the time you get to the end of this album, it's overwhelmingly intense, and the performances are so fierce and so genuine that you almost can't take any more of it. But then when it's over, like you feel exhilarated and you just want to hear it again. Summer 2018 truly belonged to Thou, the New Orleans sludge metal band. They've released a bunch of releases this year, all on different labels, but there were a couple of splits, but they released a new full-length album, Magus. They also released a bunch of EPs that almost could have been albums in their own right. They released the Brutal Drone Metal EP, The House Primordial. Rhea Sylvia explored like their grunge influences, but the one that was my favourite Thou release of the year, and the one I'm picking here, is Inconsolable. And it's the most surprising one of the bunch. This is like, kind of like an acoustic folk EP. So it strongly reminds me of like the Alice in Chains. They did two wonderful like acoustic EPs, and that very much evoked that haunting, melancholic atmosphere of those. But also like the slowcore of Red House Painters and the weird sort of ethereal gothic folk touches that show up on Maudlin of the Wild. But yeah, I just fell in love with this thing. It's so good when like you have a band surprise you by doing something outside their comfort zone and just nailing it, and that's what Thou have done. So even though I've enjoyed all their releases this year, Inconsolable is just that little bit more special. In a contextual whole, like when you put all of these releases together, it just shows that Thou are one of the most interesting, forward-thinking, diverse bands. They're not just a sludge metal band. There's so much more going on in their palette, and they've just come out full force and just taken over this year. They've made 2018 their own. So, at number 16, we have Thom Yorke's soundtrack to the new Suspiria film. I actually listened to this multiple times before I saw the film, and hearing it made me want to see the film even more. Suspiria, the 77 Argento film, is one of my all-time favourite horror films, so I was a bit apprehensive about a remake, and I did go and see it, and I was really impressed. But I'm not a film critic right now, this is a music thing, so ask me about that in the comments if you want. I think there were a few albums I was weighing up in the sort of drone, ambient, dark ambient genre that I wanted to include here. I was thinking of like Randall Dunn's Beloved album, Tim Hecker's Conoyo, Kelly Moran's Ultraviolet, all great albums that you should check out. But for me, Thom Yorke's Suspiria just went above and beyond. What I love about this album is it doesn't sound like Radiohead. For the Suspiria soundtrack, Thom Yorke has gone into a much bolder, more unique territory. Something that's like stands on his own. Like you could say, this is a Thom Yorke record, not that guy from Radiohead's record, if that makes sense. And yeah, he's really gone and explored some like new territories, such as there's a lot of choral elements, some really haunting string sections, dark ambient, nightmarish synthesizers, very strange percussion. There's a lot going on, and it is a double album, but really held my attention. There's a few songs where he does vocal performances, which I guess you could say sounds more like the Radiohead kind of way. I guess he has such a distinct voice you almost can't associate with Radiohead. But the majority of this album is instrumental. Yeah, it's just a fantastically bold release. Even if you didn't see the film, I think this works in its own right as just a fantastic ambient release. So this new Denzel Curry album, Taboo, is fire! I wasn't completely sold on Denzel Curry from hearing his previous releases. I like some of it. What I really love about Taboo is it sounds like a perfect meeting point between old school hip hop, especially that 90s sort of boom bap sound, and modern trap production. It's like they've sort of unified in a really interesting way. A lot of the production is sort of dark and murky in that kind of way I like. Think like Wu-Tang, Nas, Mobb Deep. Black Balloons is one of the catchiest songs of the year. I've played that so many times. It's got this sensationally crisp beat, and it really reminds me of like Tribe Called Quest, Far Side. It's got that just upbeat, jazzy kind of flow to it, which I really like. And it's just a nice, chilled out hip hop song. In particular, Denzel Curry, he comes out with some like really good lyrics on this album. He's exploring like the dark side of Taboo, and he even goes into commenting on like mental health and suicide on tracks like Clout Cobain. And what really impresses me about Denzel Curry is he knows when to like rap, and he knows when to use auto-tune. So the album's full of plenty of hooks in the choruses, but when he wants to like rap and get a good flow on, he can really do that. So yeah, it's just like a perfect meeting of old and new. So, Boss Keloid, their third opus, Melted on the Inch, it really takes them further than the doom, sludge, stoner realm that they were sort of born in. I know they've sort of had elements of like prog and technical metal before, but this is a bold step into a new direction. I think they've really explored the progressive side of their music even more, and they've really driven forward the percussive side of their music with influences like reggae and tribal music even further. One thing I love about Melted on the Inch is it's such a colourful album, even down to the wonderful cover art here, but it's just a really positive album. Alex Hurst really steals the show on vocals. Not only does he sound more expressive than ever, and his vocals have diversified even more, but lyrically this is just such a heartfelt and passionate album, and it just makes you feel good when you listen to it. Coming from like a doom perspective, this isn't quite as heavy or ballsy as their previous two albums, like Herb Your Enthusiasm here, but even though it's 20 minutes shorter than Herb, like in runtime, like I think it packs in just as much of that epic, complex sound that makes Boss Keloid, so props to them on that. Like, yeah, this is just a fantastic, really concise album, just 6 great songs that I keep coming back to. It's great to see Boss Keloid taking such a positive trajectory with their music and getting the recognition they deserve, so great job, lads. Fucking A. Shout out to The Body. Even though they've come from like a sludge metal background, they've really been expanding their sound a lot. They're such a prolific band as well, putting out multiple releases in one year. So shout out to I Have Fought Against It, But I Can't Any Longer. Also, they have the best album titles. So yeah, this album sees The Body going firmly into the sort of industrial electronic realm. In a similar way to what I said about the Daughters album, this is just like a nightmare that just gets more intense and dark and seedy as it goes along. So yeah, they haven't lost an ounce of their menace, and Chip King's strange sort of pterodactyl vocals are still really implemented well. I think it's been a fantastic year for new jazz releases. Kamasi Washington, Onyx Collective, Sons of Kemet, Jeff Goldblum. But my favourite jazz album of the year is Binker and Moses, Alive in the East. Yeah, it's a live album, but man, They just really go for it on this. Really fearsome performances with these really lyrical saxophones. I loved how colourful and explorative their compositions and improvs are, and it's a really like high energy album. Like, I would have loved to have been at the show, so it's probably the best live album I've heard this year as well. So props to Binker and Moses, they've come out with the best jazz release of the year for me. If you haven't heard of Sophie, she's a fantastic electronic producer from the UK. She's worked with Vince Staples, Let's Eat Grandma, even Madonna, so she's really doing the rounds. She seems to combine like bubblegum pop kind of sounds with really hard, glitchy, abrasive techno and like hard electronic styles. This debut album, it's very, very disjointed. I kind of like how it's such a swirling, wish-washy journey. You just have to sort of go with the ride. It's like, I like how she can go from one extreme to the other. It opens with the ballad It's Okay to Cry, which is just really heartfelt, glitzy, like glamorous produced sort of piano-led ballad. And it can sit on the same album as the nightmarish, glitchy, abrasive sounds of Pony Boy. She's done the rounds as a producer, done really well, and now it's time for Sophie to like take it to the next level and not just be a great producer, but a great performer as well. So we've arrived into the top 10 now, and gotta give it to the latest Panopticon album, The Scars of Man on the Once Nameless Wilderness. God, that's a mouthful. Panopticon is started as a one-man black metal act from Kentucky, US. It's the alias of Austin Lynn, multi-instrumentalist who combines black metal with elements of bluegrass, country and folk music in interesting ways. As Panopticon's discography is expanded, so is his roster, and now he's working with a big lineup of other musicians. One of the best things that's happened to Panopticon compositionally is adding in string sections. You got like violins, cellos, and some like woodwind and accordions and everything coming into the mix. It's just made his music even more ambitious, bold, melodious. This is a double album, and it's very much split into those two styles. So the first disc is like an hour of mostly black metal music, but with elements of like post-rock and like folk coming through. But the second disc is entirely a bluegrass album. Very contrasting sides to this album. Kind of reminds me of Opeth's Damnation and Deliverance. So I have to admit, the bluegrass album I didn't play as much. I've enjoyed it, played it a couple of times, but you know, I kind of thought of that as a bonus. But the black metal disc, I think, is one of the best black metal albums of the entire year. Like, really stunned by this thing. There's so many strong, beautiful melodies on this album that really got stuck in my head. It's got really good hooks as well. So you come away like humming some of these amazing tracks. A staggering, ambitious, forward-thinking black metal album. It's such an exciting time to be a black metal fan. People are thinking of black metal in such an open way, fusing with other genres. Like, I know some people like their black metal to be just pure and raw and controversial, but there's been enough of that. We've had that since the 90s, and I like the state of black metal now, and Panopticon is one of the leading acts making black metal sound so fresh and so innovative once again. Shout out to the boys in Brockhampton, best boy band since One Direction. I love this band. I could make a whole video just on Brockhampton, like they're so good. In a nutshell, if you haven't heard this band, they consider themselves a boy band, but really they're a hip hop collective with like 10 plus members. They all came together on an internet forum, bought a house, all lived in it together and just made loads of music. They released 3 albums last year, all completely independently, making their own music videos and just full of banging production, really hook-driven singles and amazing music videos. And one of the best things about them is they confront lots of social issues. Mental health, sexual abuse, gender identity, pushing for gay rights in hip-hop, all this sort of stuff. And they've had to kick out a band member who was called out for very inappropriate behaviour with women, and they've signed with RCA Records, and so there's been a huge change in Brockhampton since just Christmas, and they've had to go in and scrap a whole album with their band member that they kicked out, who was an integral part of the band, and just go on without him and try and re-find themselves. It's a very experimental album, this. They're adding in string sections, like backing gospel vocals into songs, but ultimately they've stayed true to themselves and just dared to like make something a bit weirder. So I think people were taken back by how this album didn't have as much amazing like earworm hooks. A bit of more of a left field album, but it just grew on me so much. Like just listened and listened, and it just got better and better. Tonya and San Marcos are really hard hitting, like proper like ballads with like almost choral elements and these like huge soaring strings and massive choruses that just work so well. Almost exposing the band's vulnerability and the sadness of the events they've had to go through with kicking out an integral band member. But it's also got some just flat out banging production as well. Like there's some really hard cuts on here, like New Orleans and Yovert. And yeah, it's just great to see these amazing characters just doing what they do best and refining their rap styles. It's coming from a different context as the Saturation albums. It's definitely not as immediate, but this thing really will get under your skin, and it's still my favourite hip-hop album of the year. Oh, this Let's Eat Grandma album just blew me away from the first time I heard it. Let's Eat Grandma are a duo who are, I think they're still like just come out of their teenage years. Their first album came out when they were like 16 or something, and they play loads of instruments. They play synths, they both sing, they do drums, saxophone, mandolins, like drums. They can play drums as well. It's like, damn, they must have spent their whole lives just learning loads of instruments. The first album they did, I thought it had a lot of potential, but it was very, very disjointed. It's like they hadn't found a sound yet, and that's what's really come through with their second album, I'm All Ears, because this thing is like really cohesive. Even though they still play a lot of instruments, they've managed to sort of boil it down to more of a, I would say, an electronic pop album. It's like a synth pop album from start to finish, although there's some really good sort of guitar-led tracks in there, like the closer Donnie Darko is just this like insane sort of 10-minute sort of jamming kind of track. One thing I love about this album is it's so glossy, the synthesizers just really glisten, the vocal performances are even more refined than on their previous album. Songs like Hot Pink just have this massive chorus with Sophie's production, adding like crazy little touches and sprinkles of like bubblegum pop with hard electronica, so it's a great mix. I'll Be Waiting is just a beautiful ballad. It's not just me, it's such a wonderfully catchy, pretty summertime song. Like, listen to the hell out of that thing this year. Just a wonderfully colourful and really sweet pop album. SUMAC have really pushed the boundaries this year and challenged themselves as musicians. They've put out 2 albums this year. I'm picking the latest one, Love in Shadow, for this list, but also check out their collaboration with Kaiji Haino, this cult Japanese free improvisation musician who who they went to Japan to collaborate with. Love in Shadow has 4 songs, all side-length tracks, so great one to pick up on vinyl. Compositionally, like, it's a very jarring and abrupt listen. Each sort of movement of the tracks, they kind of just abruptly change. They have these really strong ebbs and flows that are hard to predict. So it will take a few listens to really sort of get your head around. There's a lot of density in the production. I love how unsettling and claustrophobic the musicianship is on this record. I was also very fortunate that I got to interview Aaron Turner twice this year. Once for Terrorizer magazine back in January, talking about the High No release, and then I was invited back to interview them with Astral Noise. As much as I love ISIS and I really like some of Aaron Turner's other projects, I think for me, SUMAC is just where it's at. I think he's making some of the best music he's ever made. But with SUMAC, Aaron Turner is just pushing himself further and further as a musician. The best way to approach this album is just to let it wash over you. It's like being swept away in a flood of just this cacophony of maddening sounds, like so noisy, so jangly, so gritty, and when those sludge sort of riffs do come in, it's so hard hitting, and it's an album that's constantly changing up, full of surprises, and yeah, like that free-form nature really comes through. Like the use of improvisation just opens up the record and just makes it so much more free-flowing and unpredictable. So yeah, this is just one of the finest guitar albums of the year. It's absolutely gnarly, it's so heavy, so dark, and yeah, I just love the shit out of this thing. Gotta give mad props to my boys in Under. This is one of the albums I've listened to the most this year, and I love the shit out of this thing. Under's second record, Stop Being Naive. Under is weird music for weird people, made by very weird people, in the best way, of course. Under's music kind of comes from that doom, stoner, sludge background, but they really don't sound anything like their peers. They're so like out there with their compositions. One thing I love is that they really implement weird time signatures and offbeat, jagged riffs so freely into their music. Like, it doesn't sound forced in any way, it just comes so naturally. And all 3 members have these wonderful vocal harmonies. They use a lot of clean and screamed vocals really well, and it's just something that no one else is even attempting in the UK doom scene that really makes them stand out, and they're such an exciting live band as well. In particular, Stop Being Naive, it's heavier than their last album. They've gone with Ryan Gamble on production. They've taken a gamble on Gamble, and it's paid off because the low tones on this album are even more prominent, and it's just heavier, ballsier, darker, and weirder. Yeah, really one of the most fascinating bands. I think they're so underrated, like easily one of my top Manchester bands, and I don't care. I want them in my list. Speaking of weird music, we have the new album from Oneohtrix Point Never, aka real name Daniel Lopatin. So Oneohtrix Point Never has been knocking around for over a decade now. The earliest Oneohtrix Point Never music was very different. It was very like droney, ambient stuff, and as he's evolved and signed with Warp Records, his music output has got much stranger, more erratic. One of the most interesting things about this album is it's been like the year of disjointed electronic music albums. It's very like all over the place, but on the vinyl it works really well with the 2 sides. So the first side is a bit more accessible. It's got sort of these trap influenced R&B kind of cuts, and Anoni does the lead vocals on some of these tracks, and it's the whole album was mixed by James Blake, funnily enough, which is really interesting, and he sort of helped flesh out some of the songs. But the second side of the record is way more abrasive. A lot of the sort of glitch and noise elements come out really strong. And on the second side of the record, you've got Prurient, aka Dominic Fernell, taking the lead vocal instead. So there's a lot of elements going into this record, and I can see why some people thought it was very confusing, but I've loved the shit out of this thing. I keep coming back to it, and it gets better and better with each listen. Yeah, it's interesting because Daniel Lupertin is credited as one of the kickstarters of the whole vaporwave thing, which is a whole other kettle of fish I could probably make a whole video about. But he brings some of that coldness of vaporwave into this album. Weird array of sounds, and not only on top of that, he plays a lot of harpsichords. You got these weird harpsichord sounds sort of framing the narrative of the album as well. So it's a really mad thing. Not everyone's gonna like this, but if you like really abstract experimental music, this is one of the highlights of the year for me. And who would have thought you had Prurient, Anoni, and James Blake all coming together to make an album? Like, just that in itself is something worth looking out for. So yeah, weird album, but I just could not get enough of it. And at the number 4 spot, it's the new Rolo Tomassi album, Time Will Die and Love Will Bury It. Rolo Tomassi are a band that I've discovered really early on. I caught them on the tour for their first album, Hysterics. One thing I love about Rolo Tomassi is they really grow from album to album to album. They just add more into their sound. They've matured, they've explored bolder territories, and they've kept that going. Time Will Die is their most ambitious, their longest album to date. Even though there's bits of those mathcore elements from their early sound, they've really explored new sonic territory. They've got elements of post-rock, post-metal, ambient music, electronics, synth-pop, and even gnarly black metal segments. There's a lot going on in this record. Just from the way this album opens is magnificent. It starts with Towards Dawn, which is really lovely synth opening that is just bubbly, and the synths are just glistening and backmasked, and it's sounds like something Sigur Rós would open a record with. Strangely breaks into this huge anthemic sort of pop-punk song. It sounds a bit like Paramore, but a little bit more sophisticated. But Eva Spence's lead vocals are just glorious. You can tell she's just really pushing herself forward with every release and exploring these really ghostly, ethereal vocals. And the chorus on this track is massive, and then it just explodes into their darkest, gnarliest song yet, Rituals, which is where that black metal influence comes in. It sounds a bit like what Oathbreaker were doing on their previous album. Absolutely ferocious. The ebbs and flows on this album, and the use of contrasts and mixing clean sort of ambient textured stuff with really savage, blackened, crazy mathcore it's just pushed the sound so much further. This is going to be a hard album to top. Where do you go from here? Just a magnificent band that just get better and better and better at what they do. I don't know if you've ever had one of those albums where you put it on and you just melt inside, but for me that's Emma Ruth Rundle's new album, On Dark Horses. Yeah, from 30 seconds of hearing this for the first time, I was just absolutely spellbound. It just blew me away. There's just something very special about Emma Ruth Rundle, the way she writes. It's not like her songs are overly complex. They're fairly simple arrangements, verse, chorus, etc. But There's just something so emotionally raw and gritty in her performances, and she has a great backing band. Just the right blend of like soaring anthemic pop and like sort of alternative, dark, atmospherically textured, sort of like alt metal with a folky undercurrent. Tiny bits of this album remind me of like A Perfect Circle, for example. Emma Ruth Rundle's vocals are just so majestic and really they just soar. She's like a powerful performer, but it doesn't feel like she has to overemphasize ever. It just feels like it's coming from right here. In particular, like, I love the way the album kicks in with Fever Dreams, and like halfway through that track she manages to like slow down the song almost to like half the speed, and it just takes it to this even more epic direction, and her vocals just become bigger. And yeah, like Control is just such a massive chorus on that song. It's really like epic and huge sounding, but totally not in that stupid like Coldplay, U2, Imagine Dragons level of like where it's just like ridiculous. She managed to sound huge and like low key at the same time. I don't know how she pulls it off. There's something like sonically, like this album made me think of like classic like Will Oldham, like Bonnie Prince Billy, Palace music, and it was recorded in Louisville, Kentucky, so that's not like too far of a stretch, I think, there. But yeah, this album's just fantastic. It's really, really heartfelt and full of powerful emotions, and I just absolutely loved it. So we're down to the last two albums in my list, and I kind of really struggled to pick between these two. I kept changing them throughout the year. But at my number 2 spot, it's my favourite electronic act, Autechre. Oh shit, they're a Manchester band as well. Like, honestly, I'm not biased. But yeah, this is the crazy thing about this album is it's 8 hours long. 8 hours of new music from Autechre. So I guess that was the big factor, is that not everyone's going to want to check out an 8-hour long album, so I wasn't sure if I should put that as my very top spot, but this is one of the most ambitious and stunning albums I've heard this entire decade. Considering Autechre have always been at the cutting edge of their genre, like electronic, ambient techno, IDM, if you want to call it that. But yeah, they've made lots of classic forward-thinking albums in the 90s. They've always sounded ahead of the game, like ahead of the curve compared to all their peers. Only like, I would say, like Aphex Twin and Boards of Canada sort of on their level, but for me, I just think they're just in another world of their own. Like, their productions are so meticulous, it's unreal. Like, no one makes beats like Autechre. They've just played with more freedom, and they're just exploring even further, and they feel less constrained than they've ever been. I think the best way to approach this album is, if you think of all their previous albums as like a film, then instead of making a film, they've made a TV series. I love David Lynch films, so it's like, this is their Twin Peaks instead of their Mulholland Drive. It's just like more. It's just bigger, grander, but everything you love about Autechre is still here on just a massive scale. This is very much an album for Autechre fans. So I would say, if you've never heard Autechre before, maybe go check out something else other than this to start with. Maybe like Try Repete, Amber, Chastic Slide, for example. It sounds blasphemy to even say this, but I think this is the best Autechre release ever. Just the fact that they can push themselves even further this late into their career is just astonishing. So to describe the sound of the album, it's very cold, sparse, highly repetitive, gargantuan compositions that just morph, glitch, undulate wildly. Like, there's elements of like drone, ambient, really like choppy, crazy percussive stuff. Like, really, it's like everything they've been doing up to this point, like, almost like it could be like a best of Autechre in its own right, just stretched out. It's still, like, in a strange way, really, I found it really accessible, and it's not at all like a slow burning album. It's still got plenty of immediacy, punchy moments, still flows really consistently. It's 8 hours long. It's just 8 hours of some of the most brilliant electronic music you'll ever hear. And so we've made it to my #1 album of 2018. But this album, it's very much been like the soundtrack to my year in a way. This album, it's been around at pivotal points not only for my year in journalism but also in my personal life. Even though the album was only released in October, I managed to get like an advance on it in like the spring. And even before that, I'd heard stories about it being recorded. So, yeah, it's really sort of been there across my journey this year. It's hit me on a personal level, and it's just a phenomenally good album. It's another Manchester band. Maybe I swear I'm not biased. Should we cancel the? We don't have to have a #1 on the best of the year, right? No, we do? Oh, okay. Well, anyway, the #1 album of the year is... So, if you don't know Pine, they're a Manchester collective, kind of like, I think of them as a post-rock band, but also with elements of post-metal, atmospheric sludge, and they sort of come from a post-hardcore background as well. One of the reasons I love this record so much is how incredibly ambitious it is, and the band have like written and recorded and produced it entirely by themselves, and dear God, it sounds absolutely stunning. So much detail and richness in this album that every time I came back to it I was discovering more and more nuances. Essentially, this band, they take the rock setup and they add strings like violin, cello and lap steel guitar, elements of electronics. In college I was just obsessed with like Sigur Rós, Godspeed You Black Emperor, Mogwai, Slint and all the Hydra Head Records kind of stuff, and then I got into like Neurosis, and I feel like Pine just encapsulate all of that. Like, personally, I see them as more of a post-rock band than a metal band, and that's no way like a derogatory thing. I'm not like, fuck, they're not that metal, like I mean, they can be gnarly when they want to, but I kind of looking at this album in like a post-rock context. One of the things I love about Pine is they've rewritten the post-rock rulebook. They're not held back by the crescendo core where everything sort of starts quiet and gets gradually louder into a big climax. They'll like come in with a bang and it might undulate sort of in the middle or throw in a surprising twists and turns. Like, there's really coming with a fresh approach to a genre that I kind of lost interest in over the last 5 years. The album is called Loss and obviously explores themes of grief, and it's an incredibly moving and heartfelt and passionate album. One thing I really admire is that there aren't very many vocals at all on the album, and the instruments really speak and sort of evoke the emotions of the songs themselves. Like, the strings and sometimes the guitars sound like they're weeping with sadness. You've got Distress, which actually has these enormous sort of discordant string sections, and the song embodies distress. It sounds anxious and intense and angry. It's not all just like the sounds of sadness. I think the track Blanche is actually one of the more uplifting spots on the album. It's a song that really grew on me. Rests on this like clean, twiddly guitar interplay. It sounds kind of like the math rock of Tortoise on Glass Museum, which is a great track that you should check out. It has this looped, distorted spoken word sample that acts in the place of vocals, and it ends on this super satisfying, crunchy bass riff that just like blows my pants off. I can't believe this is a debut album. Yeah, I just love bands that are so forward-thinking and ambitious and meticulous, and Pine have embodied that. They have such a unique sound, they do things their own way, fiercely independent, they're all lovely humans and super, super talented. I don't even think they realise. So yeah, this just had to be my album of the year. It's just been there for the whole journey. It's like, so it's an album I couldn't even escape from. And this is the only band I've interviewed for every publication I've ever written for, so kudos. So yeah, this band deserve every great thing that's coming towards them, and do check it out. If you only check out one album on this list, it's got to be the best one, right? So yeah, hats off to Pine. So there it is, that's my top 20 albums of 2018. Let me know what your albums of the year are, and yeah, like and subscribe and all that.